The discipline we act on each day is often the barrier between us accomplishing our long-term goals or putting things off for another tomorrow. These micro decisions create a cascading effect over time that can either work in our favor or against us. So in today's video, I want to go over how we can approach discipline differently to make the harder decisions simpler and the easier ones seem insignificant. Discipline is a very fragile beast. It's the difference between you choosing to brush your teeth at night or not, and then facing the consequences as a result. It's the difference between you grabbing that bag of chips or a healthy snack instead. It's also the difference between you sitting on the couch and watching Netflix rather than doing a writing piece you know needs to be done. I say that last one because that was me this past week. There I was, knowing that a task needed to be done, but instead I let it just linger in my subconscious. It's our commitment to action, or lack thereof, that is ultimately going to create the programming of how we go about our disciplinary practice. A question that I find myself asking is, am I going to commit to this action easily? Am I going to stay consistent committing to this action even when the going gets tough? Or am I going to defer and distract myself and seek comfort? The reality is a lot of us, including myself, tend to go to the latter. The reason why we tend to favor comfort over discomfort is because of the innate resistance that we're going to get along the way. Resistance is an inevitability in life. How many times have you found yourself trying to learn something new, whether that be picking up an instrument, learning a new language, and it seems like you're accelerating through progress, and then all of a sudden you hit this roadblock. It's this roadblock is where resistance lies, and it's that thing testing you whether or not you're actually going to want to pursue it or not. The pursuit is challenging. It's full of oscillations where you're going to feel like you're making tons of ground, and then moments where you feel like there's a sense of despair or hopelessness. But really, this is all just part of the experience. Can you imagine there not being any resistance when you go and learn something new? Imagine just picking up a piano and being able to play like Beethoven or Chopin straight away. There wouldn't really be much gratification at the end if you didn't put in the countless tens of thousands of hours to get yourself to that point. Now, how we face resistance is ultimately going to be what shapes our disciplinary practice. We're not fully in control of all the variables that are going to hit us along the way, and there's probably going to be a ton of roadblocks. But there is one thing that you do have consistent control over throughout this process, and that is your perception. Now, how you perceive this resistance is ultimately going to shape your disciplinary practice. Some people view resistance as a roadblock, and they're going to turn the other cheek and immediately start on the next thing. Other people look at it and they view it as a challenge. They see it as something that they should be going after, something that is actually worth pursuing. Now, our time is only so finite, so it's important that we pursue things that are actually going to be worthwhile and benefit us in the long term. So when it comes to resistance, try to view it more as an instructor, kind of weaving you through the parallels of life. It really is going to be a teacher and guide you from one thing to the next. And it'll show you when something isn't right, you need to take a couple steps back, or when you need to continue to push forward and pursue something. It's important throughout this process to discern whether or not it's worth pursuing, or if it's something that you might just be wasting your time on and not necessarily getting the most out of into the future. Now that we understand what resistance is, this is where we start to see some division in people who decide to pursue hard things versus people who don't. And that is by looking at acceptance. Acceptance, just like resistance, is a very challenging thing to deal with. It requires us to take ownership and responsibility. It requires us to look at objective truths around us rather than subjective fallacies. You are where you are in life because of the small, almost meaningless decisions you have made up until this point. Meaningless in the sense that at the time you made this decision, it probably didn't seem like a big decision. And what we tend to think is these big decisions are ultimately what shape our life, when it's actually quite the contrary. It's a culmination of these small micro decisions compounding over time that lead us to making those big decisions in life. First and foremost, we have to accept these circumstances. We have to accept where we are in life as the grand totality of our decisions up until this point. And there's a beautiful duality to this whole process. On one hand, we have very limited control. The world is a ever-changing thing with a certain dynamism that is almost impossible to keep up with. There's no possible way for you to keep in control of all these levers in life. You'll just end up exhausting yourself and burning yourself out as a result. However, in the other hand, we are in full control of our reaction and our perception to this ever-evolving environment. I've found in myself that once I let go of all the things that weren't in my control and took ownership of things that were, there was a massive perception shift. There was a sense of liberation and empowerment, mainly because life wasn't just happening around me anymore. It was happening for me because I took the driver's seat. There's a really interesting paradox around this. I'm not sure if this is a universal principle or not, but it's something I've noticed in my own life, where it's not until I fully accept not having something or fully accept something that is when I'm going to receive it. Now, this is all well and good. We now understand what resistance is. We understand that it's an inevitability. We also understand that we have to accept our circumstances and take responsibility for ourselves. But now comes the actual tough part. Now is the work. Now is the time for action. Action is where resistance, your perception to that resistance, and acceptance all come to a head. It requires us to stop looking in the mirror, stop doing this self-work where we're just continuously indulging in information, and go out and actually do something about what it is that we see. Applied discipline over time is ultimately what is going to yield results. A quote that comes to mind around this is, "A short practice that you do every day is better than a long practice that you keep putting off until tomorrow." The big picture is important. It's important to be on a trajectory, be on a roadmap of where we want to go. But we don't want our 10 or 15-year goal to overwhelm our today. Because what we do today, what we do this week, what we do this month, is ultimately how we get to that 5, 10, or 15-year goal. Whether you signed up for it or not, you and I are part of a marathon together. And this marathon is called life. So what are you going to do about it? Are you going to complain that the weather wasn't right today? Or that the pair of shoes that you were born with isn't as good as the person next to you? Or maybe it's best to just put one foot in front of the other and start walking. After all, today is the last June 28th of 2020 you're ever going to have. If you're watching this in the future, then that day is already gone. So what are you waiting for?